So let me talk a bit about global best-in-class research. You heard Bruce refer to, again, the evolving world in which we operate. A year ago, we had 3 possible topics that we discussed with the trustees. One of those topics was this first topic. The 2 additional topics included leaders as communicators, which we know today in our world, supervisors are really, as Bruce said earlier, where trust is built or broken every day. The third area was generational differences in communication. We have as many as 4 generations of employees in the workforce today. We know this topic will continue to grow. The one that we centered on that we're going to talk about today is the area of global best in class. And I refer to this because I think, again, as you hear from Colleen Learch, who's Vice President of KRC Research, who's partnered with us on this work, you'll hear that as we've looked at 10 great companies that you see here, Cargill, FedEx, Toyota, Chevron, GE, Johnson & Johnson, Petrobras in Brazil, McDonald's, Unilever in the UK, and IBM, we're learning some fascinating things about this field that will help to focus us in this first phase, this qualitative phase that we're in. So I'm going to invite Colleen Learch to join me. She's going to share with you the takeaways that we have from the interviews in progress already, and then I'll come back and share with you our next steps after this. Colleen.
So we have a 2-part research program that we've laid out, starting with some qualitative research of those companies that you just saw on screen. And we're about halfway through our qualitative phase now, and we're learning a ton from spending an hour or so on the phone with individuals within those companies, talking to them about how their organization is structured, what challenges they see, how they meet challenges, how they approach employee comms. And not only just listening to their philosophies and their, overarching ways of doing things, but also hearing the anecdotes and the stories and the explanations they give as to why and what they experience on a regular basis. So we've got about half left to go, and that's going to give us some really great information for developing a survey instrument that we'll be able to administer to a global group of organizations that work in that are global organizations and across the spectrum. At this point in the qualitative phase, we are seeing 4 main characterizations of organizations that we consider to be best in class that I wanted to bring to the group today and share with you. And these have been very pronounced in all the interviews that we've done to date, and we're looking for these in future interviews as well to see if these observations persist. The first being that within all the organizations that we've talked to, there's an employee-centric focus that drives communications and communication strategy. And this is undeniable, almost from our first greeting to our last word on the interview. There's this clear employee-centric focus. And within this, what we've heard time and again from these individuals is that they work hard to keep an open line of sight up and down the company so that employees have a line of sight into what leadership is doing and the direction that leadership is taking the company, and that leadership have a line of sight into what employees are experiencing and their desires and what they need to do a good job. And that's driving how they communicate and how they make decisions. We also see this employee-centric focus manifest itself in how the organization communicates. And that how involves not just channel, but tone and timing and spokesperson and everything else that's a part of a communication and a message going out. And time again, we'll hear these individuals on the phone with us say, well, we've got to keep in mind what do the employees need. We've got to keep in mind how we talk to employees about this. It's something that they really have at the heart of what they do. Another characterization of best-in-class companies that we're seeing is that these organizations are setting benchmarks and goals that align with corporate goals. They're taking the corporate goals and they're saying, okay, what does this mean for employees? Where do we have to get our team? And sometimes that means that, the corporate goals require certain training programs to be instituted, or that there be, specific hiring approaches or retention goals, or internal growth goals, but they are completely aligned with what leadership has set out to accomplish, and vice versa. We saw in many of the interviews that we're doing, these are organizations that are moving beyond traditional channels of communication and starting to think about community building. And if community building is a goal for the internal comms team or the employee comms team, it winds up becoming part of what leadership acknowledges as well. So it really, that line of sight really does work up and down. Third characterization that we're seeing is that these are companies that are focused on measuring performance and success toward those goals and tracking employee attitude along the way. They're not just setting out benchmarks and goals. They're not just making claims or instituting a program. They're taking the time to research the initiative that they intend to launch to get it right. And they're taking the time to not just evaluate that initiative, but to build and put in place ongoing tracking programs so that they constantly have their finger on the pulse of what employees think and feel. So they know how they need to adapt and how to get where they ultimately need to be. A fourth characterization, and this is similar to what I said before in the first, where I said that from almost the first hello to the last goodbye, you felt that employee-centric focus. We also felt this deep-rooted desire to always improve communication with employees. These are individuals that are not resting on the fact that others may think they're best in class or might think that they have something to offer. In their mind, they feel as if they have a lot of growing to do. They have to work harder to take into consideration what frontline workers need. They have to work harder to bring, a global focus to their communications. They have to make sure all of their regions and all their departments are on board. They're not just resting with, we do this right, let's go. It's what do we have to do? What do we have to do next? With that deep-rooted desire to, do a good job, there also comes this natural understanding. It's almost as if it's second nature to them why they should care so much about employees and employee communications and why they should have an employee-centric focus. And in all of the interviews, they explained to us they explained to me that if you have an informed employee, that means they're probably knowledgeable about the company. And if you're knowledgeable about the company, that means that they are more likely to feel engaged and potentially even feel valued within that company. And if they feel engaged and potentially even valued, they might be happier, but they're definitely going to be more productive. They're going to hang around a little bit longer, and they might even become a brand ambassador. And they might even really become an advocate for your company because, much like Dr. Berger pointed out earlier, public relations starts with inside your company. And that's just a philosophy that all the people that we talk to tend to embrace. But these individuals were not ones who were focused on the outcome. They weren't communicating or striving to improve their communications with their employees because of an outcome. Whereas that's important, they also kind of felt like it was just the right thing to do. And that might sound a little bit naive, but it came over time and time again that their focus was not necessarily on retention, although that was critical, especially for some of these organizations where the talent pool was very, very limited. Their focus was on, we just want an engaged employee because it's the right thing to do. They're spending a better part of their day with us, hopefully a better part of their life with us. We did have, in this round of interviews, we did have at least half of those individuals half of those companies that still did believe in lifelong employment for an individual, which I know is a little more rare now, but within this group, they felt that was very, very important. Even on those that didn't stress it, they did focus on wanting to build retention, but that wasn't why they felt as if they needed to take their employees into consideration. Now, just in thinking about all that I just said and those philosophies, we drilled down a little bit more to find out, what it is that, these companies are actually doing to bring that to life. What are they doing to create that line of sight up and down and to make an employee feel valued? And I've bucketed it up at this point in the research, recognizing we still have more to go. It's about four main method buckets. Firstly, you've got channel. This is a group that is still using traditional channels, memos, emails, communication out, but they're not doing it in a traditional sense. And let me give you an example. One of the corporations that I was speaking to said prior to her coming on board, it was standard practice for the organization to hit forward on a press release and say, by the way, everyone, this is what went out today. Send or distribute, print, whatever it might have been. When she came on, she took a different approach. She said, sure, the press release is fine, but our audience is employees. And our audience might even be 3 or 4 specific groups of employees instead of just bucketing them all up as employees. So we can send them the press release, but why don't we actually talk to them like they're our employees and tell them why the company is doing this, what this means for them, how this is going to impact their job, what they need to know going forward, so they can read this press release and have some understanding of how this impacts them. And she said that change, actually, they were able to tie to a boost in communications relevancy within their annual employee tracking scores. So it was just a different focus. You know, as she said, the press release isn't written for the employees; it's written for people who read press releases. So why are you going to communicate to your employees with that style? We're also seeing, when it comes to channel, we're also seeing, organizations take on more non-traditional channels. They are looking to build communities for information dissemination, not just from the top down, but also across department, across region. And what we're hearing from organizations that are doing that, they're not just picking a community and building it. They're actually doing a fair amount of research to figure out how a community, an online community, can be well served by the employees and how this could look to really be something that's good. And they're taking time to figure out how to roll it out. And one individual said to me that they knew that it was becoming part of the culture when they saw employees start to use it without being forced to use it, and use it in ways that they hadn't necessarily thought of. And when they started to see other regions who weren't yet required to engage on it, calling and saying, you can expect to see this, to see us, within your online community in the next 6 months. We're already preparing for it. So, and she attributed that to the research that had been done to make it, feel more digestible when it was originally rolled out. Other bucket to point out, there's a lot that comes from tone from their perspective. They've got a responsibility to inform, but they also have a responsibility to respect and engage, so that the employees are not always being talked down to. They're talked with, they're explained to, they're brought along in the communications, not just issued an edict. Timing was also very important. There was a lot of emphasis in these interviews on early notification where applicable, not always the case, but where applicable, early notification helps, they found. And organization-wide announcements that are shared and disseminated throughout the company, not just from leadership on down. So, in a global organization with multiple departments, getting all the decision makers and all of the communicators on board with an organization-wide announcement. And lastly, I mentioned this already a little bit, but measurement was just so key when it came to initiative-specific as well as ongoing benchmarking and tracking. So focusing a little bit on outcomes now, because part of the interview was really to understand the meaning that these individuals attached to the work that they were doing. I mean, certainly this is a time-intensive undertaking to do it right, and they were putting a lot of emphasis. And some of the individuals we were talking to had fairly large internal comms or employee comms departments. And measure outcomes for these individuals were both measurable and immeasurable. Whereas they wanted to see their scores rise or at least stay the same in tracking studies, and they wanted to see retention numbers and recruitment go up. They also felt as if there was a general sense or tone that you could observe, that you could, maybe not in actual numbers or dollars tie back, but you knew that it was an output. So in characterizing the outcomes, longer tenured employees is believed to be something that comes from good, solid employee comms. Brand ambassadors was considered to be a really, really big one. Time and time again, our individuals are telling us that if you keep your employee engaged, you have a much better chance of them being a brand ambassador. If you're going to have a crisis, your employees need to be on board. If you can't get your employees on board, then you're really going to have a hard time getting the community and the outside world involved. And one or two of the organizations that we talked to definitely have dealt with their share of crisis. Another outcome that was cited through all of these interviews was the commitment to their own role or the team or the department, and that's more one of those immeasurable ones. The commitment is just so strong, so important, even if you can't quantify it. And then lastly, these are individuals who believe that good employee communications, can build brand ambassadors. It also builds reputation, and heck, that's really advantageous for recruitment because if that gets outside, and if your talent pool is aware of that, you become a much more desirable place to work. And some of the organizations that we spoke to, the stakes were really high for them because their talent pool was very, very limited. So not only could they not lose individuals, but they had to focus on keeping the talent pool alive and healthy and keeping their organization in demand. So with that, I will turn it back over to Keith for final comments.